Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Writer's Workshop. In tonight's session, we will learn what it takes to write a mystery, and I can't think of a better guide than tonight's instructor, local mystery author Molly MacRae. Molly, thank you so much for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you all hear me? Yeah? Oh, cool. Okay. I'm working on now my 18th mystery, I think. It's due September 1st. I've had 17 others are out at this point. It's like, I find that amazing because it's something I wanted to do and I did it. And I keep telling myself, if I never get another contract, it doesn't matter because I did what I set out to do. But I do have another contract, so I'll have to do it 3 more times. But let's talk about writing a memorable mystery. Get back to my first page. I'm gonna be reading mostly because I'm a nervous speaker, and it helps to have notes. So thank you all for coming tonight, and thank you, Solemn, for having me back again. The library is such a great place. They do so many wonderful things for the community. Writing a memorable mystery is a lot to cover in 1 hour. So can we do it? And that in itself is a mystery. So let's hope it's one that has a satisfying ending. What is a mystery? My favorite definition is a crime occurs, an investigation follows, answers are found. It's that simple. But you'll notice that that definition didn't say anything about justice is done, or that order is restored, or that everyone lives happily ever after. That's because there are different kinds of mysteries, subgenres, and they have different types of endings. So what else defines a mystery then? They have detectives, either professional or amateur, who try to figure out who, what, where, when, and how of the crime that's been committed. We hope they have readers who try to solve the crime before the detective does. And mysteries should also have satisfying resolutions of some sort. It doesn't have to be happy or uplifting, but it should tie up the threads of the story in such a way that a reader should be able to go back and say, I saw that coming, or, wow, I didn't see that coming, but it makes complete sense given X, Y, and Z. So mystery is a very broad category with either a few or a lot of subgenres, depending on how finely you want to parse them. We're not going to go off the deep end and talk about 20 different subgenres, which you actually could, although it gets a little bit silly at some point, because there's a lot of mixing and matching. But traditional mysteries. In traditional mysteries, a crime is committed, usually a murder, in a closed social setting. For example, a small village, a university, a library. The murder is solved by a professional or an amateur by asking questions, finding clues. The murder is solved and the murderer caught by the end of the story. One of the series I write, the Highland Bookshop Mystery Series, is essentially a traditional mystery series with amateur sleuths. It's also slightly cozy, but it doesn't go to the cozy end where you have a lot of cupcakes and there are some cats and there are some dogs, but it doesn't go off into the, it's not a super cozy. We'll talk about those in a minute. Cozy mysteries have many of the key components of traditional mysteries, but they contain no sex, no violence, or profanity. And in order to solve a case, the detectives are usually amateurs who use their intellects as opposed to police procedures. They may involve a specific set of people like crafters, bakers, or knitters, or otherwise stick to a theme. Another series I write, the Haunted Yarn Shop Mysteries, it has a lot of, it's not just knitting, it's a fiber and textile shop, so there's weaving, knitting, yarn bombing. Do you know what yarn bombing is? It's where people go out at night and decorate things with things they've knitted, or like a bridge, or in the Highland Bookshop series, there is someone who is yarn bombing a statue of Robert Louis Stevenson down by the harbor. And people come by and they'll see that Stevenson suddenly has a pair of yellow knitted spats, or he's wearing a scarf or a hat. The tone in a cozy can be serious, but often it's lighthearted and playful, or it's humorous, because, who doesn't like a fun murder? And I kind of do, so I do write cozy mysteries. There's also super cozy. Super cozy is a subgenre that's so cozy, even a cat hacking up a hairball is taboo. And I know that from personal experience, because I write a series under a pen name for a company that only wants the super cozy stuff. It's okay for me to kill someone. I can murder someone. But when I had the cat hack up a hairball to point out a clue, figuring a cat can't talk, but it could go wet, 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 and near something that someone should notice, they said, oh God, no. I was like, okay, take that out. And I don't think I'll ever get over that. There are noir mysteries. They're atmospheric, stark, and gritty. Classic noir protagonists are complex characters who are flawed, risk takers, and often self-destructive. They drink, or they're just always going down the wrong road. They often end on a really downer note. Postman Always Rings Twice is a great example of noir. They can be a lot of fun, but they can be very dark. Police procedurals speaks for itself. They focus on professional police investigations. They don't involve, if they have amateurs, the amateurs are getting in the way. Then there are caper novels. They're mysteries told from the point of view of the criminals rather than the detective trying to catch them. They take readers inside the crimes and the heists, giving them full access to their motives, their tricks, and their swindles. And often the crooks are a bunch of colorful misfits, and the police or authorities are inept or bumbling. And planning and execution of the crimes like theft, kidnapping, or swindling is the story focus, not solving the crime. And they're often very, very funny, and sometimes very darkly funny. Lawrence Block writes some of those. Elmore Leonard wrote some. Some of them were made into movies. Get Shorty, I think, was one. Timothy Hallinan writes them these days, although I think he's now branched off and doing something else, but they can be very funny. Donald E. Westlake wrote a bunch of them, the Dortmunders. There are also thrillers, suspense, and what's now called domestic thrillers or domestic suspense. They are actually a separate genre from mystery. So I'm not going to cover those. There are some excellent reads out there, but I haven't written that, so I don't feel comfortable telling you how to go about writing them. Someday I would like to. So I've been reading a lot about how to do it, because it's a specific kind of structuring that you do. As an interesting side note, writers, even those with multiple short stories or poems, because this is true of poetry writers, essay writers, short story writers, mystery writers, writers who've won awards, writers who've published millions of words, they'll still sit down and stare at a blank page or a blank screen, and the only thing going through their head is, what am I doing here? I don't know how to write. It's happened to John Steinbeck. It just happens over and over, and it's kind of sad, but it's life, so you get over it and you go on. Some people will call that writer's block, and it might block you, but when you think about it, if you were a plumber, you'd get up and go to work every day, wouldn't you? You don't have plumber's block ever. Solon doesn't have librarian block. When I worked here, I didn't have librarian block. So you can't have writer's block. You have to work through it somehow, find a way to do it. And there are tips and tricks for working through it. If you wait for the muse to come calling, you might wait forever. Or the muse might be chaotic too. They're not always nice. So how do you write a mystery? There's no magical one way, but there are some tried and true ways. And in the end, the best way is whatever works for you. So what I can tell you is how I write mysteries, because it's been working well for me. What you need to write a mystery is you need to round up the usual suspects, and not suspects as in a mystery suspect, but the usual elements for writing anything, because it is writing fiction. You need the elements that any writer or storyteller does need. You need an idea. You need an opening hook. You need an opening hook for writing nonfiction too. Some of the best nonfiction.
Can you say that again?
An opening hook. An opening hook, and I'll go. I'm listing them now, but I'll tell you more about them in just a minute. Yeah, an idea, an opening hook, characters, a setting, a theme or problem, which is a reason for writing the story, action, tension, and a resolution. We'll talk about these elements, but put a mystery spin on them. So, the idea. A pretty common question that writers get is, where do you get your ideas? And a glib answer is, well, there are ideas running around through all our brains all the time. Don't you have ideas? But that's kind of rude too. But it's true, you know, we all do have ideas. But it might be more helpful to give you some specifics. So you can get great ideas by eavesdropping. That's a good place to start. But if you want to be more polite about it, instead of calling it eavesdropping, you can talk about overheard conversations. Check the news, especially newspapers. They're full of good stories, and you can cherry pick your details. You don't have to go, you know, specifically with that story and all those details. You can mix them around. The News Gazette has great human interest stories. You know, they have that those. On Wednesday and Thursday, they give you news from all the little towns around the area, and they're charming, some of them, and some of them are a little bit strange. You know, they also have the little in history section, what happened here back in 1922. There's some wonderful stories out of that if you want to do a historical. You can get things off TV too, but I like reading the newspaper. You can get them from dreams. You can get ideas from dreams. They don't always work out, but one of my stories published in Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine did come from a dream. I dreamt one night that someone knocked on our front door and asked, "What's your dog's name?" And in real life, we don't have a dog, but someone knocked on, "What's your dog's name?" And I answered the door and I said, "Trousers." And she said at the door, "Why?" And I said, "Because he pants a lot." Really, that came to me in a dream. That was so I turned it into a whole story about a dog napping, and Hitchcock bought it. So that was great. Never happened again. But it would be fun to have a dog and name it Trousers, I think. You can also get ideas by asking yourself or your characters questions. And we'll get to some of those useful questions in a little bit, because that sounds a little odd, but you can do that. Okay. So that's the idea. Now you've got setting. Without a setting, without a place, there is no story. The characters are simply there in a vacuum with no reason to act and no reason to care. And that's because setting is more than a location. It's not just a room in the library or the town. It can be geographic location, a historical moment. So if you read something in the News Gazette that happened in 1922 and you set a story in 1922, that's your setting. There's more to setting than just that, but historical time period can be a setting. Social climate is a setting. If you think about, you know, the Black Lives Matter, that's a setting. The pandemic is a setting. Cultural mores, the weather. Although Elmore Leonard famously said, "Don't ever start a story with the weather," but people do it. It works. Passage of time can be a setting. You think about these stories that take place over 100 years. James Michener's stuff, you know, Hawaii. Point of view is also a setting. So when you choose to write a story, you know, you're doing either first person, that's a point of view, third person point of view, and then there are you could do second person point of view. If you're familiar with the choose your own adventure books that kids like to read, they're done in second persons, like you walk into a room, you pick up this book, or you throw the book against the wall. So all of those are part of setting. And this is what setting does. It helps initiate the backdrop and mood for a story. So you can see how a historical moment could do that, or a social climate. It's a motivational factor, forcing characters to do and say whatever is said and done. So in a little bit, I'll read you the first 2 paragraphs of one of my books that it'll give you the setting and also might give you some of the motivation for what goes on later. Setting can be a force that has as much to do with shaping a plot as the characters do. Certainly the weather could be that way. Think of Wuthering Heights. That was definitely a character in that story. And again, historical moment could work there, or cultural mores. Point of view, definitely. Setting includes the context beyond the immediate surroundings of the story. That speaks to all of those things too. You're not just in the library. There's other things that inform your story, and that will come out through your characters, through your dialogue, through what happens. But it's part of the setting. Sometimes you don't even think of that as setting, because that's just part of your writing. And then when you go back, when you step back, you can say, oh yeah, look where I said it. I'm pretty cool. Often this stuff you just write, and you don't necessarily sit down and say, now I'm doing this and now I'm doing that. But you can do it that way too. It depends on how you write. Setting includes all the factors and forces acting on the characters, influencing them, against which they act and against which their actions are measured. So it's doing a lot. It isn't just the room in the library. So here's an example of setting from Last Will and Testament, the first book in my Haunted Yarn Shop series. These are the first 2 paragraphs. So you don't know anything about it except these are the first 2 paragraphs. It wasn't how I'd planned to spend my 39th birthday, driving like a crazed woman from Richmond, Virginia, to a cemetery in the mountains of East Tennessee. But I straightened the curves and flattened the verdant hills along I-81 through the Shenandoah Valley with sacrilegious fervor, willing both my car and myself not to break down. Tears and taking a hand off the wheel long enough to hunt for Kleenex at that speed would be disastrous. I stopped for gas outside Abingdon, not waiting for the receipt to print before burning back up the entrance ramp. Over the state line, a blur of miles into Tennessee. Sorry, it's so sad. It's actually not, it's a funny book, but. And a few switchbacks from my destination, it looked as though I'd get there in time when what to my wondering eyes should appear but flashing red lights in the rearview mirror. Then my ears caught the wailing siren that went with the lights, and my record for never in my life receiving a speeding ticket was toast. I pulled over, shut the engine off, rested my forehead on the steering wheel, and waited. So what do we know? What are some of the parts of that setting? We know in a car.
In a hurry.
In a hurry, yeah. In a hurry.
Something tragic has happened.
Yeah. Yeah, on the way to a cemetery. And it's so upsetting it makes me cry. And it's not me. Yeah, there are all kinds of things going on. There are some people say today it's got all kinds of feels in it. It ends up being a funny book, but it does have, it's got feels in it. Okay, so.
What's the title again, Molly?
Last Will and Testament, which gives you an idea. Yeah. I like coming up with titles, and you ask, where do you start a book? Often I start with the title and work the story from there. I didn't envision the series that way. I came up with the idea for the series, but then when I came up with that first title, all the other titles I made punny like that, and so each story, then subsequent story, grew out of the title. So the next one was Dying Wishes, and it's dying as in dying yarn. Spinning in Her Grave. Plagued by Quilt. not, K-N-O-T, the usual suspects, and then cruel and unusual, but it's cruel as in embroidery. So, after a setting, you need characters. Every story needs them, right? But a mystery needs a specialized set. We need the sleuth, the suspects, and the villain. Okay, so these are my wishes for your mystery characters. May your sleuth be capable but human, so give them flaws. May your suspects be plentiful and full of secrets. And may your villains have at least one likable or redeeming characteristic. They have to be human too. They can't be all evil, all bad. If you've got a character in there that's just totally, totally evil and it turns out to be the villain, it's like, well, that's not very suspenseful. Not a mystery. You need dialogue. Even if it's interior dialogue. You know, if it's someone telling the story and they never talk to another person, you're still hearing the story through their words, through their dialogue. So think about, dialogue is a great way to build tension. Not only to, it's a great way to show people what your characters are like through the way they talk, but it also builds tension between characters or between a character and a situation. You think about your own conversations, or the ones you hear while you're standing in a checkout line, the ones you hear while you're eavesdropping. In those conversations, people misunderstand, they misinterpret, on purpose or not. They talk over each other, they butt in, they change the subject, they over-explain, they refuse to listen. They can just be so irritating. They come to blows or worse. You know, think of what we hear in the paper these days sometimes, that, you know, there's people got into an argument and they shot each other. Like, oh, that was some conversation. That's tension through dialogue. So harness that power for your mystery. All right. Setting, character, dialogue, they're separate things, but they all mix together. We saw that in those first two paragraphs. So your characters exist in a setting. They talk to each other, or in the case of the first person point of view, we read their thoughts and observations. Weaving all that together helps your reader know your characters, helps them know the characters' problems and what they want. And it helps your story move forward, because you always want your story to be moving forward. You don't want to just drop in a lot of description of a setting that doesn't carry your story along. That might just stop it. You don't want to have, my problem is that I love writing dialogue, and I end up writing this dialogue that just doesn't do anything. I'm just having fun writing dialogue. That's dumb. You know, it's useless dialogue. I have to cut that stuff out. It has to move your story forward in some way. Sometimes it's subtle. I have a real problem with this. Sometimes I have trouble afterwards even saying, did it move it forward? But if you go back and revise, you can get it. You can do it right. So here are two more paragraphs from Last Will and Testament. Again, we're in the protagonist's head by now. This is a little bit later in the book. We know her name is Kath. She has, her grandmother died suddenly. She's inherited her grandmother's fiber and fabric shop, but she's also just found out that, and she's not sure she wants that, because she actually doesn't live in this little town in Tennessee. She has a job as a textile preservation specialist at the Illinois State Museum. She's a professional textile preservation person. But she's also just found out over the telephone that the Illinois State Museum's budget got cut and her job's gone. So, and she's also just had another run-in with that deputy who gave her the first ever ticket. So this is her after, you know, it's first of all, it's everything, but then it's this, or she's lost her job. There's that deputy who's really irritating, and he's really irritating, and he's just asked her if they can go out and grab a beer sometime. And she's just thinking, oh my God. You know, so this is her after that. My life as a weaver's glossary. Tension, warped, these are all weaving terms. Tension, warped, balanced, unbalanced, beaten, snagged, frayed, snapped. I felt like the living, breathing embodiment of all those terms and tribulations as I walked away from that phone call and the undateable Deputy Dunbar and that snug little house. Living and breathing were the key words, though. I had a place to sleep and a business I could step into if that's what I wanted to do. One foot in front of the other, head held high, nose firmly thumbed at anything and everything trying to bring me down. I pushed away thoughts of bad state budgets and doltish sheriff's deputies and let my footsteps echo the mantra running through my head. I will be fine, I will be fine, I will be fine. So again, you've learned something that takes you forward in this story. And imagine that's the last time she runs into the doltish deputy Dunbar? Probably not. And will she be fine? We don't know. There are other things that you've found out by now and you're not sure she will be fine, but she's sure she'll be fine. So we'll trust in her. She's the amateur sleuth, for heaven's sakes. Of course she's going to be fine. That's the thing. When you know who the main character is, you know they're going to be fine. But that's okay. A cozy mystery does restore the order. A cozy mystery usually happens in a small town or a small area. And when the crime happens, whatever happens, whether it's a murder or some other crime, the social fabric is torn. But through the work of the amateur sleuth or the amateur sleuth and her sidekicks or his sidekicks, investigation happens, answers are found, justice is restored, and so is the order of the community. Until next week when there's another body, because that happens an awful lot. Okay, you also have to have a problem in a mystery, which could be a crime or just a hint of a crime. Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine, one of the two premier publishers of mystery short stories, doesn't require a full-blown crime in their stories. It could just be the hint of a crime. And in 6 of the stories of mine that they published, there was no crime, just a hint of one. They're little villainies, a friend of mine called them, just little villainies. But they worked because they were mysterious. Okay. You need red herrings. You all know what red herrings are? Okay. Every once in a while I run into someone who doesn't know what a red herring is, and that surprises me. My husband didn't know what a red herring was. Like, come on, Mike, I've been writing mysteries for 20 years. He's a fisherman. He thought they were fish. Okay. So there are details about people, places, and objects that may not be true and misguide the detective and the reader with contradicting advice. Evidence, not advice. Well, it could be advice too. Red herrings can be a character who seems to be more suspicious or complicit than he actually is, an object that seems to have more significance than it ultimately will, an event that seems to be important to the narrative but turns out to be secondary. That's what my conversations are, I guess. They go on and on and on. It turns out they were nothing. No. I'll call them red herrings. A clue placed by a villain unknown to the reader and the main character to send investigators down the wrong path of inquiry. So those are all handy to have. Not all mysteries have red herrings, from what I understand. I mean, maybe the ones I read have them. It's good to have a twist or two. New information found that shocks the detective and the reader, that changes the course of the investigation. Sometimes there's a twist right at the end that just turns everything around. And some of those thrillers and domestic thrillers that are coming out today are like that. You have an unreliable narrator, and you don't necessarily know that until you get to the end and you go, oh my God, that's just everything flips and becomes clear. Those are very cool. I would love to watch the brain of someone who writes a really good one that's working on that, because that's just amazing to me. My agent said she thinks they write them backwards. And that could well be that you come up with the twist and work from there. I don't know if that's what it is. Do any of you write suspense thrillers like that? All right, you also could use cliffhangers, especially if you're writing a novel. It's good to have cliffhangers at the ends of some of your chapters. If you're writing a short story, you can have them at the end of some of your sections, because short stories do have sections sometimes. It's something that'll drag your reader forward from one scene or chapter right into the next. Something dramatic, something, a question asked that's not, that the reader also wants answered, and you don't necessarily have to answer it in the next chapter or the next scene. You can leave it hanging a little bit. That's good suspense and tension. You also need a solution. The detective has a breakthrough, uncovers the last remaining piece of the puzzle, and solves the mystery in a way that's plausible, logical, and doesn't make the reader throw the book across the room, because no one could have seen that coming, and that does happen sometimes. If it's too coincidental, if it's someone who just suddenly comes out of the woodwork who you never saw before who did it, that's not playing fair. And there are books like that out there, but try not to write them yourself. After the solution, there's often a conclusion where the culprit's caught and all the outstanding questions are resolved. In a cozy, that often happens in a very last chapter where they have everyone gets together for dinner or something like that, or they have a party, or sometimes it's the last half of the last chapter. In the Agatha Christie, it might be they all gather in the drawing room, and in Monk, the TV show, Monk would say, "Here's what happened." There's a book by Mick Herron, who's British. I just finished reading it. It's more of a suspense thriller. It's called This Is What Happened. You should get a hold of a copy of that. It's fabulous. It's delightful. Every single short chapter, you just go, oh my God, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. It's just very cool. So This Is What Happened by Mick Herron, Herron. So here's a recipe. It's a recipe for a murder. This isn't how you have to write a mystery, but this is a way to write a mystery. You start with an exciting hook. Mystery novels draw in the reader from the first paragraph, or better yet, the first sentence. Especially if it's a short story, better to get it right up there in the first sentence or paragraph if you can. Pique a reader's interest immediately and make them want more. One of the best first lines I've ever read is in a book called 3 Graves Full by Jamie Mason. This is the first line. There is very little peace for a man with a body buried in his backyard. It makes you want to know it. So I think we've got, between us and Urbana, someone's got that book, I'm sure. It came out quite a few years ago, but it's pretty good. Okay, so start with an exciting hook, then set a mysterious mood. Even the most shocking plot twist will fall flat without the right mood. Setting a mysterious mood that immediately puts your readers into the world of your novel is a must. A dark setting, such as an abandoned building or an isolated cabin in the woods, descriptive language of the chilling details of the case, suspenseful dialogue, they'll all set your readers in the middle of the action and encourage them to keep going. That's another thing. One tip I picked up at some mystery conferences: start on the day that's different. And if you're writing a short story and it's all takes place in one day, so you might start at the time that it's different. Not with, I got up and brushed my teeth as usual, then I went in and poured Cheerios as usual. That's not different. So start at the point that's different. Reveal information slowly. Slowly, but not so slowly that you drag. As you write, consider how your reader will react to how you pace your storytelling. Create the element of suspense by controlling how much information you reveal. Don't do a big dump of all the suspense in the first chapter or two. It's unrealistic, but spread it out. Spread out all that good stuff. Every mystery novel has a main storyline, but it's often built on smaller moments that sustain the audience's interest along the way. You might have a couple of side plots, subplots. Just don't let them drag your main. action down. In a little bit, I'll show you a book by Jane Cleland that has a way of diagramming, planning out your story or your novel with 3 lanes. She likens it to a highway. And I tried it once, and I'll show you my attempt to do it. It's a very interesting way of making everything happen where it should. She teaches writing. She's also an accomplished mystery author and short story writer and teacher. She has pulled apart enough mysteries that she's figured out where, at what page, approximately what page in a 250, 300 page novel you should have each kind of tension show up, or a twist, or a red herring. And she does that for each of the subplots. She talks about having 2 subplots, and also for the main plot. And it's fascinating. I love things like that. I love being able to think about doing things by the number. But actually drawing it out and writing it out, I haven't, because I have my own way of outlining. But I like that idea. I noticed years and years ago that awful lot of times in a novel, the last 40 pages are where it really picks up speed, and that's where you start picking up the final clues that you'll be able to figure out what's going on. And it seems to follow through, and that bears out in her book. Leave clues behind as you're running through the book. Let the reader feel like they're part of the story. Drop the clues throughout the novel that let them be an active participant in solving the mystery. They shouldn't be too obvious, but discovering them and thinking through the possible explanations should feel exciting and satisfying for the reader. It doesn't mean they should necessarily be able to solve it themselves, but it gives them, they might be able to, but it doesn't always happen. Tie up your loose ends. Mystery novels don't typically end with a cliffhanger. You should solve the crime, explain the mysterious disappearance, or reveal the murderer. Your ending doesn't have to be happy, but it should answer all of the outstanding questions the reader has about what happened and what the outcome means for all of the characters involved. So you don't want to just end, oh, and it was Bob in the library conference room, and they came and took him away. Because all of your characters were impacted by that. That's why your amateur sleuth was working on it, or why your policemen were working on it. So you want to have some good emotional tie-ups at the end too. Have people talk it through a little bit without dragging it out too much. Okay. So then, to plot or not to plot. To outline or not to outline. I like plotting. Many people do. Others feel constrained by a plot. I was taught to outline in high school for essays, and I still do that. I have Roman numeral 1, and then A, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's just like they always told you when you were outlining like that for an essay, you shouldn't have, if you have Roman numeral 1 and A below that, you shouldn't have just A. You should have a B as well. And I make myself do that for the mysteries too. It's like, I don't know what, but it's ingrained in me by now. I like all the information I can get without falling down a rabbit hole of excessive research and without paralyzing myself with too many options. I like to have a roadmap. And I have deadlines, and it helps me to stay on deadline, to have an outline. I'm going to show you a few of the visual attempts. I've tried a few visual, I know some people will plot by using Post-it notes all over a wall, or a cork board, or as Jane Cleland, here's her, did I bring that book? Yes, okay. Mastering Suspense, Structure, and Plot by Jane K. Cleland. You can take a look at that, pass it around if you want.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'll show you what that looks like. My not very successful attempt. Escape, minimize, oops, not. And folder. I think it's this one. No, it's not. This is something different. Okay. This was my attempt at an Excel spreadsheet with something happening in every chapter. Every chapter had an opening event, first line, the event, the last line, and then this was a book for a company where they had such strict guidelines. Every book had to have between 21 and 24 chapters. Every chapter had to be approximately 2,500 words. And every chapter had to end in something that was very dramatic. And they also didn't like cats hacking up hairballs. So there's that. And that is the entire, this is the one that has the cat hacking up the hairballs, as a matter of fact. But I cut it out. 21 chapters. It has to be between 53 and 55,000 words total. And that's a great math problem. So I actually enjoyed doing those, although it's a little irritating too, because they're so super cozy. Okay, this might be, nope, that's another one. That's another one I tried. This is one of the Highland Bookshop, and I thought, I only got as far as 5 chapters in. You see, in the first chapter, I was doing it by main character. In chapter 1, Janet's house is trashed. Christine is suspicious. Una dug up dirt. Jess was bedeviled by the trasher. And that I got as far as 5 chapters, and that was enough. Took too much time. Writing out an outline works better. So maybe this is it. Nope. Maybe I didn't actually bring the one from Jane Cleland. You can take a look at the book and see what it's like, or you can find it on, I'm pretty sure either the library or this library or Urbana has it. It was a very interesting structure. And again, I only got so far, so it's more of a, this is what I can't do. But let me show you what I do. Let's see. We will go to this. When you're plotting a mystery, when you're writing, you're not always actively writing. Sometimes you're sitting and staring. Or you might be taking a walk, or you might be at the grocery store, but you can still be writing, but you're not engaging with lots of other people. And people will say, "Why are you so quiet?" Well, you're not. You're plotting. See, so you're not quiet, you're plotting. This is a way to help build a plot. These are the questions you can ask yourself or your characters that I mentioned earlier. What if? So like, what if there was a knock on the door here and it was a policeman with a hammer? And you can go from there. So the next question might be, what could possibly go wrong if we let him in? What if we let him in? What could possibly go wrong? So then you come up with something that might have gone, that could go wrong. Well, what's the worst that could happen? So you think of the worst that could happen, and this is what I heard, I learned from Donald Moss, who's a super agent, and he teaches classes on how to really build suspense. And his idea is that you make something bad happen, the worst happen, and then you make it worse. And then you make it a little bit worse, and you just keep doing that. That works to some extent, but I read a book after that, and the person dedicated it to him, and it was so obvious that that's what she was doing. It was silly. You know, it's like, okay, so what could, yeah, now it's a bomb, now it's this. It's like, well, you have to take it and use it yourself and make it believable. But those are some good questions to ask. I wonder if there's another one. Oh yeah, now make it worse. This slide, I wasn't going to show you, but I will show you. I've shown it in other workshops. This is an acronym, CASES, for looking at the scenes in your story or your novel. Every scene should have conflict of some sort, and that doesn't mean a fight, a fist fight necessarily. It could be the dialogue, or it could just be someone being late for something. That's conflict. Needs to have some action. Needs to involve the 5 senses, or at least some of the senses, and it should have emotional shift. Where the person enters the scene, at the beginning of the scene, they might be feeling one way. At the end of the scene, they should be feeling slightly different, and that helps move your story forward. Another acronym is SUES. These were invented by a lawyer, cases and SUES. Something unexpected should happen in every scene. And that doesn't have to be something huge, but again, something to help propel your story forward. It doesn't have to be explained either, just something somewhat surprising, something greatly surprising. Things you might want to avoid in your mystery. They're the same things you want to avoid in every kind of writing. You want to avoid the trite, the stale, continuity errors, things like that. But in a mystery, you also want to avoid coincidences. I would give you some, I've got some great examples, but it would be rude. So, because the author lives here in town, and this. But if the ending of your story depends on a coincidence that you couldn't see coming from the beginning. Coincidences do happen in real life, but it's not a good ending for a mystery. There can be some coincidences throughout, but not a lot. You want to avoid the unfair ending. You know, as we talked about before, the villain appearing out of nowhere. Or the impossible, unless you've prepared your readers. You can have that very strange twist ending, but you have to then have planted all those seeds along the way, and then it can make it work. And I think that's how some of those suspense novels work, where they have that big twist at the end, and then you can see it all. Or you had some inkling along the way, but you couldn't put it all together. So my favorite tips for writers are, I've got 2 favorite ones, besides just sit down and write. Read. I mean, you've heard these before, I know, but read anything and everything. But especially read the kinds of mysteries you want to write. And then read the kind you don't want to write too, because there's good storytelling there, and good, you can pick up some tips from them, and you might discover something else you'd like to write. My main tip, though, is to revise. We were taught in high school that revision is the key to success, and I believe it. My real writing happens in the rewriting. I might be able to write, a whole bunch of words in one day, and it feels like it's just flowing, but I do have to go back and clean it up and get all the little words that are just clutter out of there. Little is one of my clutter words. Go through a manuscript at the end and take out as many littles as I can, because it's clutter. There are a lot of clutter words that people need to remove from their writing. There are some groups you can join if you're really interested in writing mysteries. There's Mystery Writers of America. That's the big organization. For my money, Sisters in Crime is better. It's less expensive. It's inclusive. It's not just women. They do a great job of offering all kinds of resources for new writers and for people who've been writing for years. They have a series of podcasts, and they're like 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, each covering just a little tiny topic. And these are people doing them who are people who've been writing for years. And they might, it's just some little aspect of writing that might be of interest to you, or not just the actual writing, but the business of writing too, or the business of marketing after you've written, or finding a place to get your work published. Sisters in Crime is over the last few years, it has really done a much better job of reaching out and offering help, all kinds of help, and they're just very, very friendly. No one ever laughs at anyone. They don't laugh at cozy mystery writers, which is really nice, because cozy mystery writers are often the stepchildren, the red-headed stepchildren of the mystery world. And Mystery Writers of America, which is full of, or used to be at least, full of big guys writing very important novels, they did laugh at cozy mysteries and laughed at the people who wrote them, which is not just women. And they would say, I did an experiment once at a conference where you could do you could have a discussion at a breakfast table. You had to come up with a question to discuss, and then people would sit down and discuss it with you over breakfast. So my question was, are mysteries like chocolate? The darker the better. And I brought a bunch of chocolate, different, milk chocolate, white chocolate, 60% chocolate, 72% chocolate, 85% chocolate, and had them all taste them and see which ones they liked. And they liked sort of I think it was the 72% they liked best. Maybe it was the 60%. And then we had the discussion, what about mysteries? The darker, the better. And a very big name author, nice guy, said, oh yes, the dark ones are better. Dark mysteries are better. Because they're more realistic. They are more realistic than these stories that take place in these little towns where people stumble over dead bodies, in every book. And then, okay, but in his series, his main character, who's an amateur sleuth, but it's more serious and darker, stumbles over a dead body in every book. And they have things like people being flayed alive. And I'm thinking, I've never come across that in my life. But I do know that there are murders in town, or there are people, there are poisoned pen letters, and there's poisonings and things like that. So I don't see, yes, there is a difference. There obviously is a difference. But I don't see them as being that much better because they're that much more realistic. But that's the attitude. So whatever. Do you have any questions? Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about books that are not considered mystery books, but they actually have mystery plots and structure?
Macbeth. There's a wonderful James Thurber short story about how Macbeth is actually a murder mystery, because Macbeth did not do it. If you read it carefully, he said he did not do it. So there are an awful lot of mysteries. I was reading something recently, a mystery recently, where a character who's writing a mystery insists that actually everything anyone writes is a romance, because there are relationships in every book. So Cat in the Hat, that's a good mystery. I love that. That's a great suspense novel. And you can take that thing apart, and it's what a masterpiece.
What was the name of that one?
Cat in the Hat by Dr. Seuss. One of my favorite books. Hang on. I did bring some other books to look. Oh, and also, I said read. I have dozens of back issues of Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine and Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, the two premier mystery short story magazines in the world, on the back table. There are plastic bags in case it's raining. There are also, I think, 3 canvas bags from mystery conferences. Please take as much as you want. Take it all. They're great stories. They're by some really cool people, too. So, but then, this is a book I picked up in Texas years ago. Secrets of the World's Best-Selling Writer. Francis Fugate and his wife, Roberta Fugate, went to the University of Texas, where they have all the papers from Earl Stanley Gardner, and looked through his notebooks and his manuscripts and wrote this book. And Earl Stanley Gardner documented how he wrote. And he said, this is what you need to do, and this is what you need. And he wrote Perry Mason. And it's a fabulous book. It's so much fun. I found it very useful. One of the best writing books. I don't know if there's a copy around, but you should be able to get it on interlibrary loan. Or you can find it on Amazon, probably. It's been out for quite a while. It's been out for probably 40 years. Mystery Writers of America did just put out a new edition of their handbook, How to Write a Mystery. It's got essays by all kinds of writers in there about all kinds of, how to write the medical thriller, how to write, it's fantastic. And then this is from the British crime writers, How Done It, not Who Done It, but How Done It, How to Write a Mystery. In celebration of the Detection Club's 90th birthday, 90 of its esteemed members share their experiences and advice about the art and craft of successful crime writing. It's got Eric Ambler and Michael Innes, Ann Cleves, Reginald Hill, P.D. James, essays by all those people. Some of them are very old, because like Edmund Crispin hasn't been alive for a long time. Yeah, sure. Any other questions? Yes.
Can you talk about character development? You told us that we need to read, and in the reading that I've done, some mystery writers take a long time developing their characters.
Mm-hmm.
In the books that I've read.
Yeah.
There are some that just throw them right in. Now, either way you can keep up with it, but is there any hard and fast rule about developing your characters?
No, you don't want to spend, I tend to get a little too slow. And it's worked for me, but I do get people writing, it's awfully slow. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to get away from that. There's a rule of thumb that you should drop the body on the first page, or in the first chapter at least, yeah. And these days they also say, no, you don't have to stick with that. But you do want something exciting to happen, whether it's dropping a body or something. You want some. That all goes to setting. It's hard. You do want, especially in a cozy, you want the reader to like the characters. So you do have to introduce them up to a point. The victim, if you want people to feel badly that the victim is dead, so that these amateurs have a reason to find out what happened, you want to set up some kind of empathy. But you could do that. You could do that later. You could do that through talking to people and say, oh well, he was like this or she was like that. You don't have to have that person alive at the beginning. There's lots of different ways of doing it, and no hard fast rule. Yes.
Apropos of her question,
Mm-hmm.
right now for many years I didn't have really a lot of time to read fiction, so I'm working my way through some authors, and I'm reading Dana Stabenow.
Oh yeah.
And she doesn't necessarily drop the body, but she's got a lot of energy in the first chapter.
That's hard to
There's
do.
something happening.
Yes, yeah, just
And it-
drags you forward. Just
Yeah,
you want to read. Yeah.
She's got you engaged, and it's not about the body.
Right,
I mean,
right.
It's about what's going on with the characters.
So-
It's right away. Yeah.
Figure out what it is. That's one thing. Nancy Picard, who wrote a bunch of cozies. She used to teach a workshop on how to deconstruct a book and just look through every part of it and see how they did that. Especially, a beginning, a first chapter. That first chapter, the thing I'm working on right now, it's so annoying. I wanted it to be about 10 or 12 pages, and it's turned out it's like 18 pages. I guess that's too long. But I don't know what I'm going to do. I'll see. It's not due yet, so. Yeah.
I think you might have answered this question when you were talking about characters, but when you told us about the characters that we need, the sleuth, the suspects, the villain, you didn't mention the victim.
Haha.
And I thought the victim should be, but I
It's true, you need a victim, don't you, of some sort, whether it's a dead person or not. Yeah.
mystery, I read the guest list
Yeah.
about a wedding.
Yeah.
You don't know until the end who it was that got killed.
That's one I put down. I read her The Hunting Party, I think it was, which I enjoyed, although it had some continuity errors in it, which really irritated me. But I didn't like anyone by the time I got to the second chapter. I didn't like anyone in that, and there's not enough time in the world to keep reading something when you don't like anyone in the book. But she's amazing. Huh. And you didn't know who it was until the end, towards the end. Oh my gosh. That's interesting.
So that was the mystery.
Yeah. Who died? How weird.
Well, I think you didn't know who did it either, but.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now I'll have to go back and read it.
Who was that on?
Lucy Foley, is it?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's Lucy Foley.
the guest list.
Yeah, the guest list. She's British. She writes a bunch of very interesting, fast-paced thrillers. They might be what's called domestic suspense. It's not international in scope, but it's not a traditional mystery. It's got all the aspects of a suspense novel or a thriller, but on a local level. Any other questions? Yes.
Could you say a little bit about how you developed your unique style that sets you apart from maybe other mystery writers, or how you decided to sort of have your own niche with knitting and so on?
There are a lot of knitting mysteries out there. So I did try to make it different by making it a shop that actually involved lots of different types of needlework. Every person is individual, so I just, it's like talking about voice. They say you have to develop your own voice so that it's your own book. And then they can't tell you, how do you develop your own voice? I think it's because it is you. It comes from within you. It's whatever is your joy shows up. I did choose some elements that I hadn't seen before, like what? Well, the textile preservation specialist, the depressed ghost in the haunted yarn shop. Who didn't know who she was? I hadn't seen that before. But there were things I thought I had not seen before, because I hadn't read widely enough in some of the cozies. I didn't realize there was always an antagonistic, or quite often an antagonistic policeman that then the main character ended up dating, and that didn't happen in mine, because when I found out that was, I'll forget that. It's hard to come up with something new. The Highland Bookshop series came about because of a thread on Facebook. I saw an ad for a bookstore for sale in the Highlands of Scotland, and I thought, oh, wouldn't that be great? Move over there, buy the bookshop. It was a thriving tourist town, so on Facebook I posted that and said, anyone want to come with me? And people wrote and said, oh, I'll come and I'll do this, and I'll come and I'll do that. And so that's how I got these 4 women together to buy a bookshop and move over to Scotland, and that's how that. And there are 6 books in that series, so that was fun. It's just I don't know if that answers your question. It's yeah. Yeah.
Are you part of a critique group, or do you have writing friends that you work with?
Yeah, over the years, the groups change. When we lived in Tennessee, and I got my first story in Hitchcock, I belonged to a small group. There were 3 women and 2 men in the group, and we all wrote different things. But it turns out we were different ages, different points in our lives, different backgrounds, different professions. But when someone took a picture of us standing outside the visitor center in Jonesboro, where we lived, it turns out that we were all exactly the same height. You could tell by looking at the bricks, our heads all like, that was so weird. So that was a nice group. Since we've been here, I have belonged to a group that keeps falling apart because I was working and writing, both full-time, and I just did not have a lot of time for extra things. I do belong to a little tiny group that's 3 people, and we each write different things entirely, and you would think it wouldn't work out, but it's fantastic. One of them is a poet, and the other one is a poet and essayist, but they write different kinds of things, and we each bring something so completely different to the critique group, because the poet's always wanting to cut things way down, which is good, you know, and she gets bored easily with fiction. So now I write thinking, okay, if Janice asking, that's going to bore her, so I cut that out. That's worked out very well.
How did you set those up?
Oh, it was the little group that I belong to now, where it's the 3 of us, that existed, but there were three women. One of them was moving away and they were looking for another person, and it was the person who was the head of the department here where I worked, and she knew that I wrote, and she said, would you like to join our group? She said, but first you have to audition. Can you give me a copy of one of your Hitchcock stories? Because she wanted to make sure that the other member thought I was at the same level, and it worked out, so that's good, and it's been great. We've been together now for about 18 years. Yeah. Yeah, it's been very nice. Yes?
I belong to a critique group, local, and we started from one of these workshops.
Okay.
And we had a writer's lounge, and passed around a piece of paper, and people signed up. There are about, I think, 12 of us.
Wow.
Probably 6 to 7 active members.
Very good.
And we were meeting on Zoom for a long time, but now we started meeting here. We tried to be on the patio.
Nice.
Every other Monday, we're meeting next Monday at 6 o'clock, so if anybody's interested.
Very
we
good.
write all sorts of things. There's science fiction, there's memoir, there's poetry, there's literary novels, mysteries, whatever.
Good. Thank you. Anything else? Yes.
It seems like I've known so many people who were always going to write that children's book.
Oh.
Or, you know, they're 75 years old and they've been going to write this book for the last 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
Could you say something about the discipline and
Oh.
that, what you have to do to get something written? And
You have to stick at it. That's just perseverance. Wow. Because, you know, like a book is a long thing, and that's what I look at it, I'm like, God, you know, it's 85,000 words. What am I thinking even starting something like this? But if you break it down into a daily goal, you can get it done. So you can, if you write 333 words a day, you know, how many days is it going to take to have a novel of 75 to 80 to 85,000 words? You can have it done in a year. So when I was writing full-time while I was working full-time, I would get up at 5 in the morning and write until breakfast time. Then I would go to work, and I would write on my lunch hour, and then I would go back to work, and then I'd go home and have supper, and I'd write until 11 o'clock at night, fall into bed, get up again, and do it again. And there were some nights when some books were due. There were times when I came to work and I hadn't been to sleep in 2.5 days or 3 days. That was not pretty. I don't think anyone noticed, but I almost fell asleep a few times sitting at the computer. That was awful and not good. You know, it's not good for your body. So when I retired, it's much better, yeah. And so you have to stick to it. when I worked in a bookstore, we would have people come in. So we always carried books by local authors. That was just what we did. It was a little independent local bookstore. And we would have people come in and say, I wrote this book. I can't believe it. I never was going to write a book before, but I sat down and I just went and wrote the whole thing. It's like, wow, that's cool. And so unrealistic. It's so unlikely that something's going to come out good enough if you just blap it all out onto the paper. You have to have the discipline to get the words down first, and it's fine to get it down messy first. A friend of mine talks about her first draft is always rough as rats, and then she goes back and she fixes it. So be willing to revise. But it can be done, and a book doesn't have to be long. I'd like to write a children's mystery sometime. I started one, and then I got my first contract from Penguin. It's like, so I had to put that aside, and I have not gotten back to it yet, and I don't know that I will. Maybe. The girls I was writing it for are now out of college. Anything else? You guys have been a great group. Thank you for all the questions, and thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming, and a big thank you to Molly. So much helpful information. Just a reminder that we'll be back in this room on Wednesday, August 17th, and that will be for a writer's lounge. So that's a chance to network with fellow writers, share ideas. So hopefully you can make it to that. And thank you, everyone, for coming.
Really nice.